Hello, welcome to another video from the conscientious biologist, Ben Gallagher. This one's on asexual reproduction. It follows on from the meiosis lesson that hopefully you've just watched. Now, meiosis produces gametes for sexual reproduction. Mitosis produces clones of cells. We're going to look first at asexual reproduction in this video, which bases mainly on mitosis to make clones of organisms to make the next generation. After this, we're going to look at the sexual reproduction lesson to look at how meiosis and the gametes can create more variation through that form of variation. It's from the GCSE specification, and please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you. So as I've just said, there's two main forms of reproduction. There's sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. This one's only looking at asexual reproduction, and the key kind of definition of asexual reproduction is when there's only one parent organism. So you've got no mixing of genetics by having two parents, which is what you have in sexual reproduction. Now, let's first look at something that we've not talked about at all in any of my previous videos yet. Let's talk about bacterial reproduction, because having just come from the video, hopefully on meiosis, which recapped mitosis, I need to tell you now about a third form of cell division that doesn't happen in eukaryotes. This is just in prokaryotes, which are bacteria, and it's called binary fission. Now, essentially, it's the same as mitosis in that one cell divides to become two cells. So by binary fission, one can become two, each one of those can divide in two and become four, and so on, and the numbers multiply. Now, of course, it's different to mitosis, hopefully you're realizing here, because prokaryotes have different chromosomes. Eukaryotes, if you remember, have linear chromosomes, kind of single strands. It can be a single chromosome. They can replicate to turn into that X-shaped double chromosome. But bacteria have these circular chromosomes. So if you try and link circular chromosomes into how mitosis and mitosis work, they can't be split apart in the same way. So you have to have this different mechanism. Now for GCSE, you don't need to know anything about the mechanism behind binary fission. You just need to know that term, that prokaryotes multiply by binary fission, that's an example of asexual reproduction. They're just copying themselves, but that you can get huge numbers from that. We've got this term as well, doubling time. That's how long it takes a bacteria to grow, replicate its DNA, and then divide. Because think, just like a eukaryote, there's my cell, that circle, it has to double in size, replicate all its DNA inside it so it can split in two. The time it takes to do that from 1 to 2 is its doubling time. Now, some bacteria can have a doubling time as short as 20 minutes. So 1 goes to 2 in 20 minutes. So if I throw some numbers up over on the side over there, you can see how quickly they can grow. It can go from 1 cell to over 2 million in 7 hours. That list of numbers there, that's 1 for every 20-minute interval, and the red, that's each hour. So after 1 hour, the 1 would become 8. After 2 hours, 64, and so on. After 7 hours down there, over 2 million. Now, if we throw that up as a graph just directly above my head here, you can see why when you feel ill, sometimes it just comes over you really, really quickly, and you're suddenly like, oh, do you know what? I feel really bad. I think I'm going to be sick. Because actually look at those numbers and look at how that translates onto the graph. The numbers stay relatively low for ages because doubling a small number still gives you quite a small number. But once you kind of hit a critical point at about 300 minutes, over there at about sort of 5 or 6 hours, suddenly you're doubling bigger numbers, getting huge numbers. So you can go from, 250,000 at 6 hours, suddenly up to 2 million just in that last 1 hour. So you can get a huge number very, very suddenly, which can make you feel really, really ill very quickly. Now, that's a really sensible and efficient way for bacteria to multiply. It's quick, it doesn't need any reproductive events. They just multiply, massively increase their numbers. The problem with this, as with all asexual reproduction, is you don't get any variation. All of the new bacteria will be identical to the one that they came from. So this is binary fission. Let's look at a few other examples now. So that was prokaryotic. Let's now look at eukaryotic, which is more that we're basing things on. Everything we've done so far has been eukaryotic, really. The mitosis, the meiosis, all of that stuff, it's all eukaryotic. So asexual reproduction can happen in eukaryotes, which remember are plants, animals, fungi and protista. So if we pull up first of just 4 examples, and there's hundreds of examples, single-celled organisms such as yeast, okay, yeast that you use in making bread, in brewing beer, in all kinds of things. It's a fungus, but it's single-celled. Now, if you're single-celled, it's really simple, like I've written up here. They simply divide by mitosis, with each new cell being an independent organism. It's just like binary fission, like the last one. Each bacteria becomes 2, but each bacteria is an individual organism. Same, if you're a eukaryotic, single-celled organism like yeast, and there's loads of other types, loads of the protista group, parameciums, amoeba, things like that, they're all single-celled as well. So they all just do mitosis and they multiply their numbers. But again, it's asexual. Let's look at something a bit more complex and multicellular. Over here, I've got a strawberry plant. The strawberry plant, like lots of plants, can reproduce using runners. Now, a runner is this thing that I'll mark in a circle for you now. Okay, you've got the parent plant sat there, but from the base, from the roots of the parent plant, they send out what looks like a shoot, but it's called a runner. And on the end of that runner, you can see right at the front of the diagram, on the end of that runner is basically a tiny little baby plant. But of course, it's just a cluster of leaves from the plant. And when it touches down on the floor, that tiny plant on the end will put down roots of its own. The runner will die away. And you've got effectively a new little plant about 15 to 20 centimeters away from the original plant, or much further. Runners can be a couple of meters long. Okay, so it's that one plant spreading out, touching a part of itself down somewhere, and that part growing into a new organism. That's pretty amazing. Okay, let's look at another weird example as well. This is with potatoes. You've all seen potatoes, you know what potatoes are, but their reproduction can be quite weird because potatoes reproduce by tubers, or one method that they use to reproduce. A tuber is what we think of as a potato. So what happens in potato plants, the potato plant will grow. As it's photosynthesizing and making lots of glucose, it sends that down to the roots through the phloem, gets down into the roots, and the root cells suck it all up, swell up, make loads more cells around them, and a bit of the root becomes big and swollen. That's a tuber, or what we call a potato. So that's just full of starch, full of nutrients that the plant is keeping down there. But the tuber can also act a bit like a seed. So at the end of the growing season, the potato plant can die away, but each tuber underground can start to sprout. You may have seen this in your cupboard. If you've left a potato there for ages, it gets little sprouts that come off it. It can start to grow, start to put down roots, and will grow into a new plant. But of course, it's growing, the tuber, the potato, is just a swelling of the root of the original plant. So it's just the original plant now growing into multiple new versions of itself from each potato. But the potatoes are made of the original plant cells. There's no genetic variation. There wasn't any cross-pollination. It was only one parent plant. Okay. Now, both of these examples are cool and a bit weird, especially when you link them up to what humans do. Because in multicellular eukaryotic organisms, it's a part of the original organism that just breaks off and grows into a new independent organism, be it the potato, kind of breaks off and grows on its own, or the plant on the end of a runner that grows off on its own. So it's a clone of the original. It's kind of the equivalent as if your little finger fell off, landed on the ground, and just started growing into a new you. That's the equivalent of this kind of asexual cloning, or vegetative propagation, it's also called as well. So that's really amazing. But let's look at one that's really, really weird, really amazing now. This, parthenogenesis. So parthenogenesis is really weird exception to the other ones above up there, because it does use meiosis. But what you have here is the female who makes an egg, but the egg, if unfertilized, can still just grow into a new organism. It still forms an embryo and grows into a new creature. Of course, that organism is likely to be haploid, which you remember back from the meiosis video, meaning it only contains half of the DNA in the original. But it effectively means that an organism can become pregnant, a female organism can become pregnant without a male's input into it. Of course, those haploid offspring might have difficulties with reproduction, with fertility rates, But there's lots of different ways that organisms have evolved this. One really cool animal that shows parthenogenesis is Komodo dragons, one of the biggest reptiles that we have on the planet. Not as big as crocodiles, but they're crocodilian group. But Komodo dragons, enormous great reptiles, but the females can give birth to viable, healthy offspring without any reproduction with males. So it is asexual, even though it's involved meiosis. It's a bit of a weird one. It's a bit of a kind of best of both worlds there. Just lastly, very quickly, when we're looking at these two, the two plants, the potatoes and the strawberry plants, both of those can also reproduce sexually. They both produce flowers, so they can both be pollinated. So with both of these examples, they can do asexual reproduction or sexual reproduction, so you can kind of get the best of both worlds. So that's it for asexual reproduction. There's really not much you need to know, and you don't need to know any of those specific examples I've just given you. You need to be aware of what asexual reproduction is. So I'm going to simplify it into just a few bullet points for you. First off, it only involves one parent organism, and they're genetically identical copies that are produced. So it's basically natural cloning. Some species can reproduce both sexually and asexually. We've just said that about the strawberry plants and the potatoes from the previous slide. There's many mechanisms for asexual reproduction because it's a really quick, easy way to reproduce. It can guarantee the next generation. And as long as you've got a next generation, your species will survive. And if there isn't the chance for a sexual reproduction, if there's none of the opposite sex, or if you're a plant growing somewhere where there just aren't other plants to pollinate you, then it does ensure another generation. The negative thing about asexual reproduction, though, is it lacks the evolutionary advantages that come with variation. If all of the offspring are clones of the original, any one disease that can affect one of them will affect all of them. Any predators or pests that are attacking it could attack all of them. They'll all have the same weaknesses. If there's change in the environmental selective pressures, they're all going to be susceptible to it. So there is a downside to asexual reproduction. There is a very fast and almost guaranteed way to create a new generation. That's it. That's all you need to know for asexual reproduction. So it's a pretty simple topic. From here, go on to the sexual reproduction topic to contrast with this, and we will be using a lot of the theory here that you gained in the meiosis lesson. So make sure you've watched the meiosis one before you go on to the sexual reproduction one, just to give you a really good grounding in the topic. Please do subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already to get access to all of my videos that are on there. Like this video if you find it useful, and head over to my Facebook page for some loads of other extra bits of biology to support and supplement your course. Thank you.